Uncensored. I am your host, Keith Andrew, along here with Scott Sanders, and I just want to say thank you for being a guest on my talk show.
Sure, my pleasure.
Now, for people who want to know what Uncensored is my way to show people that even with learning disability, I can still overcome controversy and reach my goals in life. At the same time, turning myself into a perfect example for people out there deaf, blind, or in a wheelchair. But you should never give up or have people label you, and you should prove to them you can still mount to something. And now, with that being said, so a normal conversation, you can say anything you want, you can curse if you want to, it's uncensored. And if there's subjects you like to talk about, you're more than welcome to. And just, like I said, normal conversation.
Sure, great.
If our listeners out there, if they have a subjects they would like us to talk about, they can email KeithAndrewNetWork.com, go to my website and fill it out, and if they want to be a part of it. And the other part I want to tell our listeners is right now, Keith Andrew Network presents Uncensored as an unofficial talk show, but the whole point of it is to become an official talk show. Basically, I'm just making a statement. Now, with that being said, I'm going to...
Hey, I just want to make sure. So that's Keith Andrews...
Network.
Right? Keith Andrews Network?
Yep, .com.
.com, okay. It's good to spell those things out sometimes so everybody knows exactly how to get to you.
Oh, that's true. Now, starting off with the easy questions, were you a party animal in college, or were you a study nerd?
I was a study nerd. I mean, I go to some parties, but I really don't drink much and never smoked or did drugs. So it was like the parties probably weren't very fun for somebody like me. So I would, unless I went to a movie with a girl on a Friday night or something, I was usually in the library.
All right. You said you were, so I'm looking at your LinkedIn, you said you were a president of your own company.
Yeah.
What can you tell me about that? Was it easy?
Well, I've had a couple of companies. One about 17 years ago, my father invented a product, and it was pretty good. So he asked me if I'd kind of help him from the business point of view, and he didn't realize how much was involved. I mean, he had a really good product, so we spent probably 9 months getting the product, getting patents, and then we knew right away that we wanted to do business in Mexico and in China because it had to do with natural gas. So then it took us another several months to get patent protections in Asia and Japan, China, Hong Kong, and then down in Mexico and South America. I really enjoy these countries, and I don't want to paint them as problematic, but sometimes patents are ignored in China and Southeast Asia, and so it was just really a lot of time and effort before we even got our product to market. I think it took us 1.5 years, and then we started doing business, and we didn't need to hire too many people. I think at the most we had 15 people working for the company because it was really all about having people manufacture our product on their sites, and then we'd have it assembled in Mexico or elsewhere. And then I spent the next 2 years, meeting with gas companies and Enron, people like that in Asia. This is in 2000, before Enron's collapse, and it was pretty exciting, and I enjoyed it. So, and then we sold the company to a big engineering firm, and then I continued with my business plan company. We write business plans for startups or for anybody that's trying to go into a different direction. So I've been really doing that most of the last 12 years.
All right. Well, can you give us a perfect example? What do you mean by startups?
Yeah. About 2 years ago, a friend of mine, or an acquaintance, I should say, he's now a friend, but an acquaintance of mine came up to me and said, hey, I think I've invented this app for the iPhone. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, look, I can locate clubs, nightclubs in Los Angeles. We can go in, take off their camera feed, and we can show somebody a live view of the dance floor or of the party part of the floor. They can tap a button and see where the club is, where's parking, how much does it cost. You can tap another button, make reservations, get a VIP reservation. So it's a very clever app. So my job is to write up a plan. And how are you going to make that phone application, that phone app, how are you going to make it real? Who's going to want to use it? How are you going to let them know that it's even out there? How are you going to get nightclubs and restaurants to agree to have their cameras turned over to your app? How are you going to tell investors that this is worthwhile? How are you going to make money? How are you going to pay yourself? So a business plan is like a set of architectural plans for a house. You have the foundation. You got to know where the water's coming from. How deep can you dig? And then you got to order the right materials to build your house, the glass, the tiles, the roof. So it's everything. And that's what a business plan does. And so it takes me 30 to 60 days just to really get a good foundation for a business plan, and then we go from there.
All right, well, for an example, would you be interested in doing a business plan for my talk show? Would that be something you would do, or is it has to be...
We could talk about that. Every enterprise, even, maybe this is oversimplified, but even the little girl that wants to sell lemonade on the corner, her plan is pretty simple. But, you think about it. If she has to buy a new table, if her folks don't have a table, well, then she's got to think, how am I going to buy a table to put my lemonade in the pitcher, and what kind of cups am I going to use, and where am I going to buy the lemons, and everything has a business plan. So even you have to lay out the plan. What is it that I'm trying to say to my audience? And then how can I advertise so more people know about my show? How can I improve the quality? Do I need to buy a better cam for my computer? Do I need to buy a higher quality things so that people watching the show or listening to it think, hey, there's some quality here. So all of that is part of a business plan. And do you want to make money? Do you want to earn an income from your show? So that's part of the business plan. And then what kinds of advertisers would be interested in being on your show? Are you going to try to reach people internationally or nationally, mostly in New York, mostly within your region? Because an advertiser is going to want to know that. So all those things come into play, and so Keith, you definitely need a business plan.
Well, if you're interested, I'd like to talk to you more about it afterwards.
Sure, we can do that.
Now, you also mentioned you're a book author. How many books did you write?
I've only written one book. I'm writing volume 2, so it's really kind of a book in 3 parts. It's called Your Vision, Your Plan, How to Write a Business Plan, and it's available on Amazon.com, and you can see the title of my book on my website, which you found. It's Sanders Global, SANDERS GLOBAL.com. And I originally wrote it as a syllabus for a college course. I knew a couple of professors in a business college, and they liked the idea that I originally just came to their class to give a lecture. And based on the notes and the questions, we realized that there was really room for a good syllabus, taking students from beginning to end, what is entailed in the business plan. And it's quite a bit. I've written business plans for a fuel cell car company, which was, they paid me over $100,000, and it took me a year. Not every day for 365 days, but it was a very long, drawn-out process because it included everything, not just the logistics of the car, but the manufacturing and the distribution and the marketing and all that. So when we started talking to these students and the professors, we realized, wow, there's really a need for a kind of a step-by-step process. And that's what the book is. It takes you from beginning to end. It asks a lot of questions that really help you understand what's entailed in starting a business. A lot of people don't realize if they've got an invention, a product, a new idea, if they're going to commit themselves to their business, it's going to affect everything else they do, because you need to be committed. I mean, you need to say, okay, I'm going to do this. Well, that can be really time-consuming. If you have a family and children, you're just not going to see them very much. Otherwise, you're going to not be able to do your business plan. I mean, it really is. There's the old joke about breakfast. A good breakfast consists of eggs and bacon, right? Well, the chicken has an interest in the breakfast, but the hog is committed, So you need to be a hog about your business. You need to be committed. It's like no turning back. And a lot of people, once they really get into it, many people don't make that commitment. So this book helps people understand what's really involved in starting your own business and in getting your startup going. Because I say startup, but a business plan is for anybody. You want to go clean carpets. You want to be a handyman, a repairman. You may not need me or my book to prepare for that, but it still takes a lot of thinking and preparation to start a business, and that's what this book helps you think about.
All right. So what's the difference between, you said you're a business planner, and then you said you're a business coach. So what's the difference between the two?
That's a good question. About 8 years ago, a company that fixes the sound for albums or for movie tracks, they go in and fix the sound. They actually hired me to help them figure out where their business should go. So I would go in once a week, usually on a Thursday morning, sit with the president of the company for a couple of hours, and we would talk about his company and what is it that he needs to do to expand, because they were losing market share. They were competing with bigger companies that could go in and offer more, and so their company was shrinking and they were losing money, and he's having to lay off people. Every month or 6 weeks, you have to lay off another 2 or 3 people. So they went from about 120 people down to 60, 65 people. Well, while I was doing that, we started talking about a particular direction that they should go, and they wound up hiring me not to just coach him, which I'd been doing for about 12 weeks, maybe 10 weeks, but to now, from our conversation, we came up with an idea that might help their company. And so I wound up writing the business plan for creating a new division that would work just with universities and libraries, and going in and taking their sound libraries and really help modernize them and digitize them for the next century. So that's a case where the discussion led to a new idea, which led to the need for a business plan. Now, the opposite has also worked. I've written business plans for companies, and then in 2 cases, they've hired me as an interim VP of marketing or whatever, because once I write a business plan, I'm as intimate with what that company needs to do as anybody. In fact, maybe more so. Even the president or the founder or whatever, they read what I say and they think about it, but I've had to research what I say, and I've had to make sure that I understand the market and where their product or idea is going to be effective in the marketplace. So, like I say, in 2 cases, and then in another case, I was just hired as a consultant afterwards, but they paid me for the business plan, and then, a week later, or even in the process of writing the business plan, they say, "Hey, Scott, look, you know more about this company than we do. Would you be our marketing executive for a while?" and I like that. And so, it goes both ways. But I like my independence, so I don't really want to work for a company, for somebody else, for too long. About 3 or 4 months is good. I want to get them going, but I really like being on my own. It's a good feeling. The independence is a good feeling.
All right. Well, you did bring up a couple good points I would like to talk to you after the show about. Now, like we covered the easy questions, now we're going to get to the, I guess, hard-hitting ones, or people call it the political ones, but like I said, you can pass on the subjects you don't want to answer. But starting off with everything going on in the West with Israel and Russia and everything going on with that bullshit, what's your opinion about it?
Well, let's start with the Ukraine and Russia. That conflict, and I think some people know about this, but unless you're really alert, you don't realize that this goes back to actually the 1880s. This conflict and how Ukraine and Simferopol and Crimea, I mean, we fought a war. There was a war, the Crimean War, and that really affected the borders. And there are tribes and people that go back, again, really more than 100 years. But when Marxist Russia sort of took over, and then later when Stalin became the premier, Stalin actually deported several 100,000 people from eastern Ukraine and that part of Russia to Kazakhstan, and then up to Uzbekistan. So he just got them out of there. And you still have these ongoing conflicts, just like when Yugoslavia, when Tito died in Yugoslavia, it left a vacuum of leadership, and then we got Serbia, Herzegovina, Croatia, and they just hated each other. And the only reason they hadn't killed each other off in the preceding 60 years was because there was a totalitarian state that was basically making sure that they didn't organize militarily. Well, now that's happened in eastern Ukraine and Donetsk and in that area, and it's a difficult problem, but it wouldn't have been too much of a problem if Putin had decided that he wanted to grab some country. So I really think this is Putin's some long-term strategy that he's had in mind, that he just wants to have eastern Ukraine and Crimea as part of Russia. And so I don't think I'm oversimplifying it when I say this is a land grab, and it's Putin's version of colonialism and imperialism. He's doing exactly what the Russian state hated the West for, and yet they did it themselves in Cuba and Nicaragua and whatever. So the stripes may seem to change, but not really. And look, I'm kind of a pro-Israeli. I mean, we established a state. We helped establish a state in 1948. Harry Truman was very instrumental in helping establish that. And I've been over there several times. I was in Beirut before hostilities really started. I was able to see Beirut when it was one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and now it's kind of a trash heap. And I had friends that were involved in the 1967 Six Days War, when Israel kind of basically obliterated Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon's armies in 6 days. And I think there's a lot of hatred for that. So, I think as long as fathers and mothers teach their children to hate somebody else, there's not going to be peace. And that's what's going on in the Mideast. In Iran and Iraq and Syria and Jordan and Palestine, well, there's no Palestine, but over in the Gaza and in Lebanon, they teach their children to hate Jews and to hate Israel, and that's sad, because I think there is room for peace if people could just let go of the past, but that's just not going to happen for at least a generation or two. So I think any European or Western leader that tries to go in there and say, I think we can achieve peace, well, I think that's just not going to happen. Peace, I think, is a very difficult thing anyway. As long as you have somebody that's an individual and wants something that somebody else has, it's going to be pretty hard to have peace. That is kind of a hard-hitting question, but I don't mind the hard-hitting questions.
All right. Well, the next question, I was talking about hard-hitting. All the religious nuts in the world, do you think if there's less of them, do you think the world would be a better place?
Wait, repeat that?
All those religious fanatics, do you think if there were less of them, would the world be a better place?
Well, I don't know, because it's like taking weeds out of your garden. They're just, other weeds will come back. I mean, you just have to learn how to deal with it, or to lay a foundation in your garden that's got good earth and easier to weed or clean. If you got rid of the let's just say, for an example, you were able to get rid of all the wild fanatics in the Gaza, or say you were able to get rid of Hamas, then you would create a vacuum. You'd have no Hamas, which is very, they're dedicated to obliterating and annihilating Israel. You'd have no more Hamas. So what would happen? You'd have a vacuum, and somebody else, somebody else would come in and say, I'm going to fill this place. And then maybe they were moderate 5 years ago, but now they found a place, a voice, and now they're going to be radical. It's just very difficult because, like I said, unless you can find a generation or two of getting rid of, passing hatred down from generation to generation, I think you'll always find somebody that wants to fill the space. And they may not even be committed to annihilating another nation, but they may be committed to speaking their voice, and then they'll find a place where their voice makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense, but maybe they didn't hate Israel, but they found themselves in a leadership position, and they can get more followers if they say they hate Israel, or they hate Ukraine, or they hate California, or whatever, and you'll feel that vacuum. I just think it's not just a cultural thing, it's a human nature thing. We want what our neighbor has sometimes. When we're real humanitarians and civilized, we don't just go over and kill them and knock our neighbor on the head with a hammer and say, okay, I'm taking over your house. We don't do that. But we look at somebody else's, car and husband or wife or whatever, and we say, gosh, I'd really like that. I mean, that's the kind of life I want. So I think it's human nature to want that. What makes a human great, I think, is to temper their desires and to understand I just need to work my own way to get that and not take it away from my neighbor. And so maybe that's an oversimplistic example, but I think that's kind of what goes on is going on in the Middle East. They want something, and they don't even, if Israel gave them the top half of Israel, if they gave them the Golan Heights and the Gaza and the farming lands, if they just gave them all that, said just leave us alone, from Tel Aviv and or whatever, just leave us alone, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv. In 5 years, they'd want Tel Aviv and Israel and Jerusalem. I really believe that. So I don't think there's any. I don't think land for peace is going to work either, because they just want everything. So there you go.
All right. Well, like I said, I don't want it to be one-sided, so if there's subjects you would like to talk about or any questions you would like to ask me, you're more than welcome to.
Sure. Tell me, what is your disability?
Well,
are you wheelchair?
No, I'm pretty much, without going into much detail, I'm pretty much like you, only I learn at a slower pace.
Oh,
and unfortunately, people refer to that as being retarded.
Well, that's an interesting question, because I've often wondered, what is the threshold for being deemed retarded by medical community, because you seem pretty normal to me. You're alert, you're articulate, you ask good questions. So, it must be a little frustrating to be sort of in a category, and yet you obviously embrace your disability, so you know that there's something there, but you're doing, I think, great things to make sure that isn't an issue, right?
Right.
Now, do you live? Which part of New York is this show emanating from?
Oh, basically, it's upstate New York near West Point.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I've been up there. I like New York. I have friends in Rochester, and I've been driven through there a few times. I used to live in Washington, D.C., and I loved going up there in the fall. So I'd go up through New York and then cross over through Connecticut and Massachusetts and go up to Maine. And yeah, so I love the area. It's pretty nice.
What about California? Do you like it, or did you get used to the earthquakes?
I was raised here, and I have to say I'm pretty prejudiced. It's a beautiful place. It's I live 40 minutes from the ocean, from Malibu and the Pacific Coast, and I live in Los Angeles. But if I go an hour east, I'm near the Mojave Desert in Death Valley. If I go an hour north, I'm in beautiful low mountains of Santa Barbara and Ojai. I mean, it's just a gorgeous state. The weather is great 9 or 10 months a year. We're in debt. The state politicians over the last 20 years have not done a great job, and I think the taxes are a little high, but I've got everything I want here. I mean, it's just really nice. I've lived in Northern California and Southern. I prefer where I live now, Los Angeles. It's warm, and there's a lot of activities and movies and theater and restaurants. And like I say, there's the coast, and I'm only 2 hours from San Diego, which is also beautiful. And so I really like it. I lived in Washington, D.C., though, for 20 years, and I got really used to it. But a 2-week spring and a 5-week summer and a 6-month winter. An icy winter. It snowed sometimes for 3 or 4 days, which was nice. But very often it'd snow for 1 day and then freeze over. So there's a lot of ice on the highways all the time, and it was humid in the summer. So it wasn't a bad place to live. I just prefer where I am now.
All right. Well, then the next subject I was going to ask you is, where do you stand on legalizing marijuana?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. I have honestly never smoked it. In fact, I've never done any drugs. I tried a cigarette in high school, and I said, forget it. I'll have a glass of wine once or twice a month, or maybe a beer, but I just don't drink and smoke. So I've never smoked a joint. My feeling is, my gut impression is that it's not a good thing. I think all the studies, and even friends of mine have said, I made a mistake of, I smoked, or I did a bong or a vaporizer or whatever, and then they were kind of not feeling so great for a couple of hours, and yet they still drove home. It's no different than being, drunk. And I do think it leads to, I don't know, I just don't like the term recreational use. When they say whether it's cocaine or marijuana or any other kind of drug. I just have seen a lot of good business friends and people just become different people after a few years of using some drug. So I'm not excited about the law. I don't. It's not something I'd go out and say, yeah, legalize. But we legalize tobacco and we legalize vodka and so it's like people should be allowed to make their own choice. Unfortunately, those choices are sometimes lead to accidents and overuse or graduating to other drugs. But we all have our personal freedom and free agency and freedom of choice, which to me is more important. So if people vote to legalize it, then I'll live with that. I'm not going to go out and protest it.
All right, well, wrapping up the talk show, do you have any funny stories you'd like to share, or anything you want to say to your fans and listeners?
Oh, probably I would have if you had alerted me that you were going to ask me that question. I could have thought of a couple of funny stories, but I don't have anything right off the top of my head. No, the thing that's really interesting about doing a talk show is, like I've done several, and they're all different. And, they all ask different questions, and their goals are different. And so it's kind of interesting to think, okay, what is the point? What do they want to get out of this? Is it a show that's a business related? Is it, government related? What's going on? And so, so it's just been, it's always kind of nice to be surprised. And I think you could ask harder questions next time. It's okay. I think people can handle that. You can do that. But just to say this, for those listening, I think Keith is doing a great thing. And Keith, I mean that. I think you're doing something that's important. I think we become better people, and when we become better informed. I really think that. I think we become better citizens and better neighbors when we're informed about what's going on. What I said earlier about the Mideast or whatever, you're going to have just as many people that disagree with what I say. And that's what's good. It's good to have that discussion. And it's good to open up a forum so that people can say that, because maybe people don't know that this conflict goes back 100 years. But maybe somebody does know that, but they have a different viewpoint of it. And that's okay. I like discussion. I like fully engaged discussions. They're okay. So, and I'd be happy to revisit this, talk to you another time. I've enjoyed this.
Thank you.